Hello, I'm Bill Monroe, and welcome to episode 87 of 2-Minute Talk Tips. This week's tip comes from special guest Scott Charlston. Pick your headline.
What is your headline? Look in the newspaper. What is a headline? First of all, what is a headline? So if you're going to be speaking, you want people to come. Why should they come? Oh, it's a tantalizing topic. What makes it a tantalizing topic? A really good headline. So I would say the way to get to that point where you can write your own headline, in other words, what is my speech? What is my message? And why does it matter? Why should someone drop everything and come hear me speak? Because I'm going to address a really important topic, or I'm going to provide this new important bit of information or advice for handling a difficult, challenging scenario that you hadn't previously considered. So what is the headline? What is news? It is new, surprising, valuable, different. We joke in the news business, dog bites man, that's not news. Happens way too common. No one is surprised when dog bites man. If man bites dog, yeah, that's news, right? So it's the unusual. So when you're writing a headline, it doesn't have to be about dogs, but it would fit into one of those categories. Is it new? Is it surprising? Is it interesting? Does it change my world? Is it humorous? Humor is a good headline can be humorous. And again, that's the way I think to spice up the speeches. Start with the headline.
Stick around, and after the break, we'll hear more from Scott and learn about the intersection of public relations and public speaking. Welcome back. Last week, Scott Charlston and I sat down at a busy Starbucks, as they all are, in the eastern Seattle suburbs to talk about public speaking. See, I had first met Scott through a professional job hunting workshop where we were both looking for our next adventures. And by the way, if you're looking for a great PR or media relations expert to run your team, please reach out to Scott. And of course, if you're looking for a corporate trainer, product evangelist, or podcaster, just email bill@2minutetalktips.com. Scott has one of just those fantastic media voices that you really just want to listen to for hours on end. His media and speaking background really comes through clearly, especially when it comes time to edit a podcast, because I had to remove fewer ums and ahs than pretty much ever. In this episode, you'll hear about just what it is that PR professionals do and the things they work on while doing media training. While there's an obvious surface-level overlap between public speaking and public relations, ultimately, it actually goes deeper. The core themes of defining and knowing your message, understanding your audience, and telling compelling stories that I talk about all the time on this show are also the core elements that Scott focuses on in his work with executives and media relations teams. Scott spent 6 years as an anchor and reporter at Spokane's KREM-TV before moving into the field of PR nearly 20 years ago with Weber Shadwick and then Verizon Wireless. He's done media training, media relations, executive coaching, and even more, all with a focus on putting people at the center of the story and distilling complex ideas into clear benefits. So now, let's explore the intersection of storytelling, PR, and public speaking as we meet Scott Charlston.
At my former employer, Verizon, there was a hyper-focus from the PR team. Hey, let's get away from text and specs. People don't, the mass audience out there, they don't care about text and specs and how fast and the gigahertz and the gigabytes and megahertz and megabytes and all that stuff. Let's get into what matters to real people. Consumerize it, peopleize it, make it matter. And people only have so much time to devote to reading about things or listening to learning about things. Don't make them work hard to understand what it is you're saying.
So why did you make that move from journalism and the glamour of being on TV in Spokane, Washington, to the field of corporate PR?
Yeah, good question. And oddly enough, I mean, a couple of things, but it kind of came down to a numbers game. On the bright side, it was I had an agent for a very short time, and I was getting offers and interest in places like Orlando, Florida, and my wife said, the size of the bugs are this big in Orlando, Florida, and they have alligators in people's back. We're not going to Orlando. And so I'd focused on trying to get from Spokane to Seattle. I remember in the spring of 2000 doing interviews with both George W. Bush and John McCain for the 2000 presidential primary. And then just a couple months later, I made the switch to PR. I'd been trying for a couple of years to get into the Seattle market, be a weekend anchor, be a morning anchor. But at the time, I just wasn't quite making the grade. And so I was fine for Spokane. I wasn't getting chosen for Seattle. And so I just, I'd seen a lot of people make the switch either to political public relations, from journalism to political PR, go be the PR person for the congressman, the governor, the senator. But those people are tied to the political fortunes and the political whims and to the voters. I was in Spokane when Speaker of the House Tom Foley was voted out of office, and there's a great little story that the people in Spokane thought that George Nethercutt was going to become the Speaker of the House, and that all of that power that Foley had as Speaker of the House from Spokane was just going to immediately transfer to the Republican. Not so much.
Like Congress was run by Spokane.
Exactly. Yeah, not so much. Anyway, it was a great time. I really enjoyed it, but there's only a few jobs in Seattle television news that I wanted, and I started thinking about PR. It's like, wow, there's dozens and dozens of jobs in PR that pay quite a bit more than what I was earning in Spokane. I'd talked to colleagues who'd made that jump from journalism over to public relations, and I chose corporate public relations and have not looked back since.
Nice. So I guess, one of the things that I think is really interesting is that there's this perception that PR is then the dark side of informing people, just like, with sales. One of the things I have to coach salespeople about is there's no shame in being a salesperson because sales is an honorable profession when done ethically.
Right.
What would you say to folks who just feel that PR is just sort of an evil thing?
Dark magic.
Yeah, exactly.
Spin. So I don't have a problem with the word spin because think about almost any complex topic. There are multiple vantage points from which to generate a point of view. We talk about point of view. Well, what's point of view? Well, depending on which direction you're looking at something, it's either nothing or something. If you're behind the wall of something, you see what's going on behind the wall, behind the curtain. If you're in front of the curtain, you have a totally different view. And so if you spin around from the front of the curtain to the back of the curtain, okay, is that spin? Is that taking a different perspective? Is that looking at one issue from a different vantage point? You look at the world of politics and you look at the world of public relations, and there are a ton of parallels. My former employer, Weber Shandwick, biggest PR agency in the world, helped Beijing, China win the Olympic bid in, when did they host? 2000, 2008, I can't remember what year. But what they did was convince the world to focus less on the sins of China, human rights abuses and all kinds of problems, pollution and everything we all know about, and the promise of China. So let's focus on the promise. What will happen if the doors to China are opened wide and the world comes into China? That's public relations in a nutshell. Is that a dark magic, a dark science? Maybe, but it's really about point of view and perspective. And what is the issue? So you talk about politics. What really is the issue? You talk about the caravan of people coming up from Guatemala, El Salvador, Honduras. Is it an invasion? Or is it a bunch of people who are unbelievably poor, who are just walking because they want to hope for something better? Are they victims? PR is about perspective, angle, and point of view, and to the extent that you can help a journalist see the point of view of your company, your organization, your product, your service, your feature, whatever it is you're representing, you've done your job. Because what I tell people in media training, an executive who's about to go on 60 Minutes or about to go on King 5 News, whatever the case may be, I tell them that journalist just got done talking to your enemies. Give me 5 competitors and enemies that hate your organization, or maybe not hate, but you know what I mean, compete against you and dislike your company, your product. That's who he just got done talking to. Now you're going to sit down next to him. Don't expect a cozy, comfy conversation. It's going to be a little problematic. The questions are going to sound like they're accusatory. That's the way the media tends to work. They take an adversarial role. Public relations is about helping you put your best foot forward. How do you do that? By providing a credible point of view to position your product or service in the way you'd like it to be positioned, and to envision the headline. And that's a great point for public speaking, for anything, is what do you want the headline to be?
I think one of the things that's interesting too when you point that out, and having to talk to executives about understanding that perspective. A lot of executives, and the higher you get up in an organization, the more likely you are to be surrounded by people who are not going to tell you negative things or raise negative issues about your business. You are living and breathing the story that you want people to know, all the good things your organization is doing and the successes in a way that people outside the organization aren't.
Exactly. So it's important for leaders of all organizations to understand the skepticism with which journalists are paid to come to the table. If they don't have cynicism, skepticism, a doubt about the potential success of your product, then they're not doing their job. They're paid to, also talk to the analysts, to the experts, to the industry people who look at all the competition, and they're supposed to have that big picture view. And then, okay, let's get into the weeds too. And definitely I want to talk to your organization about why this product or service or feature will succeed. But bear in mind, I am going to talk to those who doubt your point of view. And once you help them understand that, it can really help move the needle. But I do see that a lot of executives will have a bit of hubris. They're full of knowledge, information, and all kinds of leadership skills. But overconfidence is an issue until they have a media interview or some other kind of media experience that kind of goes south on them. And they also can have kind of a lack of boundaries. So I would say among executives and doing media interviews or public speaking, overconfidence and lack of boundaries. And when I say lack of boundaries, here's what I'm getting at. Before it was the Internet of Things, people at Verizon, AT&T, and a lot of the folks in the connected world would talk about machine-to-machine connections because it was one computer connected to a network. It was a sensor connected to a network that spoke to a computer somewhere else in another state. So it was machine-to-machine was the language that was used. And we had an editor from Read Write Web. I don't even know if they're still out there, but I think Read Write Web. And so they're doing an interview with my boss, and it was my brand new boss, and he's brilliant beyond belief. Probably the most brilliant guy I've ever worked with. And as he was describing Internet of Things and the promise and the future and connected sensors and knowledge and data from everything that can tell you anything from your appliances to the Fitbit sensor, everything. He injected a comparison from Minority Report, the movie Minority Report, Tom Cruise, which is really kind of creepy because that's a world where we now think, what's Bill thinking? Oh, Bill's got negative thoughts. Bill is going to commit a crime in a couple of years because we know what Bill's thinking now, and the logic gets you to a crime in a couple of years. Therefore, we're going to have to arrest Bill. Well, that's Minority Report kind of in a nutshell.
Right.
And and my boss introduced the comparison. And so the headline was The Creepy, Amazing World of Machine to Machine. So creepy never would have been in the headline if my boss had never introduced the Minority Report comparison. I can see why he made it.
Sure.
It's, oh my gosh, we're getting intelligence we never had before. There's data we never knew. We can now get inside Bill's head. Oh, that's a scary place.
Yeah.
Let me out of here.
That is a really terrifying place, let me tell you.
Mine as well.
And it's very loud, too.
Yeah. So anyway, there's an example of a little bit of overconfidence and a lack of boundaries. And I see it at all levels, but particularly at the executive level.
Yeah, well, once you get to the executive level with it, then it becomes a lot more impactful.
Yes.
So it's one thing when the intern in product marketing oversteps with that a little bit on their Twitter account, but when it's the CEO, then that's a different scale altogether.
Absolutely. When I did media training, I went down to even middle managers and some in the Verizon world data scientists. And they would go on sales calls. They would, and they knew how to fix everything. They were sort of the masters of the early smartphone era, and trying to speak smartphone to, the early enthusiasts as well as the 50 and 60 somethings who looked at a smartphone for the first time and said, "What the heck? Those are really small icons." Anyway, so I'm in one of these media training sessions, sharpest data scientist in our organization, and I was playing the role of reporter, and I was saying, you know what? I've got kids, I'm in a neighborhood, and they're proposing a cell tower at the park, community park in my neighborhood. It's a couple blocks away. Should I be concerned about my kids playing in that park and the RF emissions from a cell tower? It's a concern people still have today.
Sure.
And he answered that just fine, but he didn't give much information, and so I prodded and I pushed like a reporter would do, and then I even did this, nonverbal, palms up, sort of hands palms up. It's like, what I'm meaning is that all? Is that the only information you've got on this? And he blurted out, and he did something that in media training we call this breaking into jail. Breaking into jail is very bad, right? You don't ever want to break into jail. You break out of jail. Breaking into jail is this: introducing a topic that is inherently negative. So what he did was he said, well, those neighbors, that community homeowners association would get paid handsomely for that cell tower agreement. Oh, they get paid. Are you well, of course, anyone with a business sense would know that that's probably the case. But do you want that to be the story? No, because often reporters are on a fishing expedition. They come with one story, but really they're thinking about 2 or 3 other potential stories, and they just kind of want to poke and prod and see where it goes. Maybe there's a bigger, better story for tomorrow or the next day, or maybe for tonight's, 6 o'clock newscast. And so, you don't want the story to be about the contracts and the agreements and how much homeowners associations and individual citizens who have a cell tower on their farm, their ranch, their suburban property. Oh, they're getting $4,000 a month? Are you kidding me? So anyway, that's not the story that any of the cellular providers want to be out there. But that's breaking into jail. Sometimes executives and people at every level will introduce a negative topic, and then they can't extricate themselves from that topic. That becomes the topic. It becomes noisy.
Yeah, that's one of those interesting things too. When you talk about how reporters do that in fishing, it's one of the things I've cautioned folks about and taught folks about, is that you have to make friends with silence, because so many people can use awkward. We have this drive to fill that awkward
know
silence.
when to stop. It's like if I just do this, Bill, and you see me with my palms up, both palms up, which is I'm pleading for you to give me more information. Everyone sort of would understand that, at least in the American culture. That's that. And then with a little bit of quizzical look in my face, like, any more? Is that all? Come on, give me some more. And most of us have that desire to please. But you're absolutely right. You cannot be an effective communicator if you feel the need to please and fill the silence. You got to know when to stop. And again, that gets back to boundaries. You have to have boundaries and know when you've said your piece and you're done. It's the journalist's job to come up with the next intriguing question. Don't try and do their job for them.
So in PR and media relations, what are the ethical guidelines folks try to follow?
Well, I think
in doing the work.
Yeah, I think so. So number one, you're in an organization, you're in a corporate PR world, and you're connected to marketing. PR and marketing are sort of stepsisters, stepbrothers. They
that
are
holy
connected.
trinity of marketing, PR,
Yep.
and sales.
Yep. They are connected at the hip. And so you know what they want. And yet when you're talking with journalists, you can't use the fluffy language of marketing. So you have to be the interpreter to get the language right for the journalist, knowing that you're going to have to write an email pitch to a journalist. And so you're taking the announcement or the information, the competitive analysis. That's always a part of, when you're talking about a product or a solution or a service. Chances are you're not the only one. So you have to know, where does this fit? Where are the advantages? How can we craft a headline that I can use in a subject line to a journalist? Because at the end of this, the PR person needs to be able to convince a journalist, this is worth writing about, this is worth talking about, this is worth a podcast. So I always say you win or lose in that subject line. And if the subject line goes too long, forget about it. You're not going to win. It'll just be deleted immediately. It takes a certain skill to think like a journalist, to know what a journalist likes to write about, what they've written about previously when it comes to your company or the general product or category that you're asking him or her to write about again. Know what they've written on that topic. We love in PR to attach to a trend. This product or service helps solve this particular problem. When I was writing and doing PR for a product at Verizon called Family Base, which is a content filter. Mm-hmm. How do you give your 13-year-old son or daughter a smartphone and then hands off? No, of course not. You want to know what they're doing, where they're going, who they're talking to, who they're texting, which apps are they using, and there are tools to help you discover all of that. So, there's also all kinds of studies about whether teens should be spending as much time as they are in front of a screen, whether it's the computer screen, laptop, tablet, phone. For kids, it's mostly the smartphone. And so you have to kind of play that delicate dance, because fear is a great motivator. What is your child doing with their smartphone? And is that appropriate? And do you as a parent have any power in this? Well, the answer is yes. And so using the negative, marketing is like, no, don't go there. Don't talk about the negative. No, talk about the positive. Well, if you're talking to a journalist, they're going to find out what these latest trends and studies indicate about teenagers' use of smartphones and apps and which ones, and what's the appropriate age for a teenager to start using Tinder. Bill, do you have the answer to that?
I would say it's about 72.
That's probably about right. When you're sort of safely out of range. Anyway, so I wish there was a simple answer, but those are the sort of the things that a PR person must deal with. It's got to be relevant to a journalist. Has 20 other people already written about this topic? Then why am I going to write about it? And also know, when you're talking about a journalist, who are his competitive peers? If you're talking to Uber Gizmo, do they care that it's already been on The Verge or some other website that sees itself as sort of cutting edge, writing about technology and trends and teenagers? So,
what I think is really interesting about that too, in the context of public speaking, is that we've been talking about, why the consumer should care, why the person that's going to be getting this information is going to care. But really what we're talking about here is your audience in that context isn't the general public. It isn't that reporters, that journalists, readers, or consumers. It's that journalist.
Yeah.
So you have to understand your audience, that journalist, and why that journalist should care, not just about the content, but from that meta perspective of what's going on in their competitive space, what's going on with other things, how can they do better in their role with the resources you're about to provide and with the message you want to share.
Right. You say meta, of course, you really need to, as a PR person, you need to be following that journalist on Twitter. And before you pitch him, you should be looking at the last 20, 30, 40 tweets, unless that's like in 2 hours, if he's a super tweeter. But if you go back a couple of weeks or maybe a month or two into that journalist's tweets to see the perspective, the point of view he or she tends to have, and if he or she uses Twitter to distribute his latest article. A lot of journalists do that, and they've been doing it that way for years and years and years. They send it out on Twitter, and then it's on their media website as well, kind of simultaneously. So it's important, and journalists will tell you in a lot of the PR publications where they're advising PR practitioners, journalists' biggest pet peeve is always PR people that reach out to me and don't have any idea what I write about, how I write, what I'm interested in, what my publication is all about. Sometimes these people are freelancers. They might write for 4 or 5 different publications. So in that scenario, you should help choose which of their publications might be most appropriate, or suggest it if you think your product service maps right into one of the media outlets that they write for.
If what you're saying is, it almost sounds like most folks don't bother to do that.
That's true. And there are tremendous tools. There's, I'm trying to think of the one that was just introduced to us within the last year at Verizon. It was called Muckrake, which has all kinds of negative connotations going back to the early 1900s journalism. But it's now a tremendous tool to give you all kinds of background and data, and also it's a way for journalists to seek an expert source. There's a number of these. I was in our weekly meetings, we talk about HARO, help a reporter out. Reporters are continually looking for subject matter experts on topics they don't really know a lot about. How are they going to learn? They need to talk to a subject matter expert, quote them in their article, or maybe they're an anonymous source, or maybe they just provide background information. But reporters are continually looking for information about topics they know very little about. And so Muckrake, HARO, Help a Reporter Out, and others. There's others as well. Try to unite those two worlds.
And I would definitely suggest anybody go ahead and subscribe to the HARO newsletter. It comes out 3 times a day. It's about an average of 200 to 250 requests from reporters every day. And you may have expertise if you want to help them out and potentially be quoted. But the other thing that I think is really interesting about that tool is as you go through the requests, you start to see how articles that appear in magazines and other publications get built with. How do they find these people with these stories? This is how, and it really helps you start to understand the context of what you're seeing in those articles, where a lot of times, the assumption is that everything we see in a publication
came out of the blue.
They came out of the blue, and the reporter figured it out as they researched it. It's like, no, they start often with what do they want to talk about, and then go find the resources to support that.
Yeah, what people don't understand about that world is that most media outlets, whether it's digital, print, magazines, newspapers, broadcast, have an editorial calendar. And in that calendar, they have topic ideas. So the consumery magazines around April, May, June, one of the topics is always going to be what? Dads and grads and Mother's Day, because those are occurring in spring and early summer. And then as you get to August, there's back to school. What kinds of things do parents buy in back to school? Well, there's clothes and there's technology and maybe cars. Who knows?
And the thing about that is that is the calendar for when that content is supposed to come out.
Right.
But if they're talking back
3
to school
months
for August,
prior.
September, you're talking April, May is when they're writing that stuff.
3 months prior typically is a good rule of thumb. Sometimes there's opportunities that are more late breaking. The other one of here's another little behind the curtain. Maybe it's not a behind the curtain for you, but I think for a lot of your listeners, when you see someone who appears on your local news or maybe even national news, the Today Show, who has, I've got the 5 hottest tech toys your kids are going to love for back to school. Well, guess what? Those 5 are all paid for by the manufacturer. And it's a great opportunity, and probably those are 5 leading candidates for really cool back-to-school technology toys. But to think that person is a true, journalist who did all kinds of research and no, those are paid. He gets paid whatever 10 or 20 or 30 grand per device. And then he gets all the information proper, and he's got to be pretty credible. But it's surprising how much of television, even big time network television is now somewhat available, not all the time, not every situation, but there's a fair amount of pay for play going on with national network news and even, I shouldn't say national network news, talking about morning shows. So Today Show, Good Morning America, there's some opportunities there, and there would be plenty of opportunities if you look locally at something like an evening magazine. There's an awful lot of pay for play, and it goes across the digital world. I don't want to pick on broadcast because it's out there lurking in an awful lot of arenas. And again, doesn't mean it's bad information, but as a consumer, you probably should have a little bit of skepticism about some of these. Here's the top 5 best anything. I've certainly engaged with bloggers, and depending on the size of their audience, number of followers, they would get paid for writing an article. We did it with Family Base, which is, again, that content filtering thing, and it's a valuable tool. It's not the only one. There's plenty of great tools out there. But, you know, when a company wants a spotlight shown on a service or a product, and they want more than just advertising, they want to go into the world of paid social or sponsored social or whatever you want to call it. The mom bloggers, the dad bloggers, whatever they may be, maybe the singles bloggers that have 100,000 followers, 200,000 followers, they're going to get some money if they're willing to write that sponsored article. You want that article to be written in the creative, authentic voice, and yet there's going to be some key messages that are jammed into that article to describe when it matters, how it helps, and who it benefits. And hopefully those are worthwhile, readable, and credible. But it's not journalism.
Right.
It's something between the world of journalism and marketing, and it's really closer to marketing than journalism.
And, you know, that blogger and that author who's getting paid for that, they still want to provide value to their audience.
They do.
Their primary interest is in keeping their audience, and they don't want to just, you know, just turn into something that's just serving just who's writing the paychecks.
Right.
It's about finding that balance.
Absolutely. And just because it's sponsored doesn't mean it's not beneficial, valuable, and new information.
Absolutely.
It can be all of those things.
Absolutely.
So the sort of the democratization of digital media, really. Yeah, I mean, again, we go back to when we were kids, sorry, but one newspaper, 3 local TV stations, you know, maybe 4 or 5. Now there's a bazillion websites where you can get information on everything. So when we were launching, I want to say the very first Droid phone, this would have been 2008, 2009, and I went to a local blogger who kind of had a promising audience. His name is Andrew Edwards. He now does video reviews for Amazon. You can see him on GeekWire. He's become quite a little media celebrity. He actually was even featured in a Samsung TV commercial where they just took little snips of opinions from product reviews. And his product review and his image was in a Samsung for whatever, Galaxy 9 probably. Anyway, back in the day, 2008, 2009, I gave him the first Android phone because I knew he was an iPhone lover.
Sure.
Loved the iPhone, wanted him to see the Android because Verizon and Motorola and Google were desperate to get people testing and trying and looking at. Oddly enough, the day he posts his review, which is about a week or 2 after I gave him the phone to test out and try out, I looked on his website, and lo and behold, here's his review. It's positive. There's photos. There's video. There's all kinds of fun stuff. There's also a Verizon digital banner ad for the Droid phone. Now, this is kind of small potatoes, and this is 2009. And I was kind of blown away because I'd never told marketing that I was working with this blogger. I'd never told anyone except my little PR team. So somehow the wizards behind the curtain figured out that, you know, this site was doing a review and immediately throw a banner ad to every review that we can find to get more attention, more focus, more visibility. It's an amazing world. It really is. When you think about all the hands that are playing a role to try and get more focus, more attention, more promotional benefit and value for today's technology products and services.
right? Because there is so much stuff out there, so many products and services, and so much opportunity for folks to communicate or engage or do whatever they want out in the digital world. It's hard to figure out what's going to be the right solution. And the best reviews, the best resources, and the best storytellers are going to be what cuts through that to ultimately help the consumer.
Exactly. Yeah. The bloggers that can quickly summarize, here's what I like, here's how I use it, this is the difference it's making in my daily life. And they can be little things. They honestly now, after, we're up to Apple iPhone 10, Samsung Galaxy 10 is just around the corner. I mean, we're at version 10 for all these things. It's not the amazing breakthrough, groundbreaking, unbelievable, gonna change. It's the little things. Mm-hmm. Oh, it's a little bigger. Oh, the screen resolution is a little brighter. Oh, the battery lasts a little longer. 10 years ago, we would have yawned at advances that were described in those terms, and yet today, I think I need to upgrade.
Yeah, exactly. So we've been talking a lot about digital PR and a lot about what's going on behind there. A lot of times what we have is we're talking with a lot of folks who are going out and sharing their story and sharing their message. And we talked about some of the executives who deal with hubris and boundaries. And what do those executives tend to do well when you get to them the first time? What are they already good at?
The good executives are comfortable in front of an audience. They have a sense of pacing. They have the ability to sense where the audience is. In other words, did they react to my joke? Did they enjoy humor? Are they tracking with me? And so there is that interactivity, I find, especially in today's executives, because a lot of them are doing a lot inside the company. They have to do speaking for this group and that group, and the modern exec has to do an awful lot of that kind of speaking. So they have to read the audience well. I think most of them do. And kind of see the future. Here's where we are, here's where we need to go. And so you're talking about inspiring the audience, which is your employees, but then when you go to an external audience, you also have to take them somewhere. And I find most of them are really good at knowing, all right, here's where we are, and explaining that, but then also saying, here's where the industry is going. Here's what consumer trends show. This is where we are going as a society. Whether you're talking about political trends, whether you're talking about technology trends, consumer trends, educational trends, it's that ability to connect with the audience. Oh, this guy really knows his or her stuff when it comes to today's challenges, problems, opportunities. And then, where are we going? If an executive doesn't have that vision, he or she will not last. We had a saying, and I don't know where the saying came from, you'll probably recognize it. If the pace of change outside the organization exceeds the pace of change inside the organization is dying. In other words, don't allow the pace of change outside the organization to exceed the pace of change inside the organization. The great organizations are continually looking for ways to grow and expand, change, move, morph, and then have the metrics to evaluate, hey, was that a good move? Did we leave a business that really had no potential? And did we enter a business that has all kinds of potential? Did we enter with the right amount of enthusiasm and all that? So,
literally, if the outside world is going faster than the inside world, the organization is literally being left behind.
Yeah, and you see it. There are books. Our leaders at Verizon had to read a book, How the Mighty Fall. And it was a case study of a number of corporations that didn't make it. I mean, Sears and Woolworths, there's numerous examples of, and why the decisions were made that ultimately led to that company's downfall are described in vivid detail in that book. It's a really, really good book. And very simple, like 120 pages.
We'll definitely link that in the show notes. You mentioned Sears and doing that. One of the things my mother has been ranting about lately is about how Sears' collapse really sort of begins with their decision to get rid of the holiday print guide and the big book catalog right at the time when Amazon was starting to really bring back the idea that you just order stuff to your home. And
the catalog is online.
Yeah. Sears was essentially in the Amazon business for 100 years. They just missed that analog to digital translation.
That's a perfect metaphor. It's exactly the business, and I hadn't really thought of it that way until you just sort of described it, but that's exactly what, and Amazon, the brilliance of it is they are course correcting multiple times a day on literally, well, maybe not every web page they've got, because that's into the bazillions, but they are looking for feedback to improve the user experience, the shopper experience on every page. The Sears catalog, once a year, and yet in many ways, quite similar, just without the product reviews and all the opinions and the snarky comments.
Exactly, but you would still pull it out and just sort of flip through it recreationally.
Exactly. What might I be interested in buying at? Or the Sharper Image catalog.
Ooh,
whatever happened to that?
Yeah, exactly. A lot of folks who are really trying to get into that, but mid-level managers, what mistakes are they making in their speaking?
So, Bill, let me tell you a story, because this one is actually quite good. So this is when I was public relations with Verizon, and there was a power outage throughout much of the eastern suburbs of Portland. Big storm had hit, and there was a power outage. And so several of our stores lost power. And so they couldn't sell, true enough. And this one particular store was at Mall 205, which I think is Gresham, somewhere out in the eastern suburbs of Portland. Local CBS TV news truck comes up, and they're just looking for folks to interview. And the store manager and maybe the assistant manager are just, right outside the store and kind of waiting. And cameraman and the reporter come up and says, "Hey, you willing to talk about the impact of the storm on your business?" They kind of look at each other. What they should have been thinking is, let me call Scott Charlston and find out if I should go on the 6 o'clock news for CBS in Portland. And if so, what might I say? But they just decided what harm could come of this. And so it's, seemingly innocuous. All right, they're just going to talk about the power outage. And sure enough, that's what they talked about. And sure enough, the soundbite that ran on the 6 o'clock news, CBS television in Portland, Oregon that night, included a comment from a Verizon store manager saying, "Yeah, power kind of knocked us out, can't sell anything. We can't really have any customers in the store, so it kind of stinks." Basically, words to that effect. Now, if they had called me and it had been, if I'm in my right mind, I'm going to tell the store manager, "Okay, you can do the interview, but you and I need to have a conversation. It's going to be focused negatively. The power's kind of killing your day, right? You're losing money. How much money are you losing, Bill?" No. Here's what you say. "Yeah, okay, there is a power outage. It is impacting us somewhat. But you know what the good news is? The good news is our cell phones are still working. You know why? Because Verizon has backup generators at every cell site in Metro Portland. And the cell sites are connected to the switch facilities. We have one switch facility that covers about 300 cell towers in Metro Portland. And that switch facility has got backup power as well. Even if PG&E goes down and there's no power to the switch facility, they turn on the generators and everything is functioning fine. So your cell phone is going to work great." Unfortunately, they didn't call me.
Right. And that would have been a fantastic story and a much more interesting one to put on the news, too.
Yes.
And that opens up all sorts of great stories about the people who are out there working to get those generators going, to make sure they're fueled.
And Verizon, we would open our doors and show, we do tours. We'll take you on a tour of the switch facility so you can see the battery room. Not only do we have these enormous generators, the size of which you have never seen before, and literally you got to put earmuffs on because they're so loud. We also have a backup battery room with, 1,500 batteries, just stacks and stacks and stacks, and then rows and rows and rows of backup batteries in case the generators go down or they don't have diesel fuel. So there's backup and backup, the redundancies that go into effect. Because why? Because people depend on their cell phones like no time in history.
And that's the power of storytelling in the media or in speaking.
Exactly.
Well, Scott, thank you so much for joining us today. I apologize for running over our scheduled time a little bit here, but I think this has been absolutely fantastic.
My pleasure. You do a great podcast, and I can't thank you enough for the invitation.
Awesome. And if folks want to know more about you and what you're up to, where should they go?
LinkedIn.com/Scott Charlston, and no E in Charleston, otherwise just like the city in South Carolina, but no E.
There we go. All right. Thank you so much, and have a fantastic day.
Thank you, Bill.
I hope you enjoyed that chat as much as I did. If you'd like to reach out to Scott, you can find him on LinkedIn by just searching there, Scott Charlston, Charleston without the E, or just head on over to 2minutetalktips.com/Scott, and you can click on the link there. What are your thoughts on this chat? Are you more interested in PR now that you have a little bit more of a background in it? Let us know in the comments over at 2minutetalktips.com/Scott. Be sure to share this episode with a friend, colleague, relative, reporter, or PR specialist by giving them the link 2minutetalktips.com/Scott. Of course, subscribe to 2 Minute Talk Tips for free in your favorite podcast app. And, as always, don't get best, get better. Thanks a lot. I'm Bill Monroe, and I'll talk to you next week.
Two Minute Talk Tips is a proud production of the Currently Speaking Podcast Network.